Keisha Johnson was a hardworking single mother, juggling long shifts at the hospital and raising her daughters, Imani, Kyla, and Nia, on her own. She wanted what every parent dreams of: a stable, loving environment for her children, a sanctuary from the hardships of life. But that sanctuary would be shattered by the one person she let inside, the man she trusted. Jerome Washington was charismatic and kind, a man with easy smiles and reassuring words. He offered Keisha the support she desperately needed and became a father figure to her daughters. But hidden beneath his gentle exterior was a predator, someone who would betray them in the most unimaginable way. In the months that followed, the Johnson household would become a prison of fear and secrets. The betrayal would go unnoticed, hidden behind the laughter and kindness of a man who had crept into their lives like a shadow, leaving devastation in his wake. Keisha Johnson shuffled through the stack of overdue bills on the small kitchen table, her heart sinking with each one she opened. The crumpled envelope from Georgia Power revealed another month's late fee, and her rent notice was highlighted in urgent red ink. It seemed that no matter how many shifts she took on at the hospital, she was always just barely keeping her head above water. Outside, the Atlanta sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the narrow windows. She could hear the muffled laughter of her daughters from the back room. Imani, her oldest at 14, was practicing her latest sketch with Nia, the youngest, trying her hand at coloring. In the midst of it all was Kyla, her middle child, diligently working on her math homework. Despite her struggles, the girls were her pride and joy, her reason for pushing through each exhausting day. As she leaned back in her chair, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jerome, the man she'd been seeing on and off for the past few months. They'd met at a mutual friend's party, and Jerome had been attentive, thoughtful, a rare combination in her world. He was warm and easygoing, the kind of man who made you feel seen, even in a crowded room. To Keisha, he'd become a glimmer of hope, someone who brought a little light into her otherwise heavy life. "Hey, Keisha, I thought I'd swing by tomorrow if you're free. I could help with that leaky faucet you mentioned." Keisha smiled at her phone, feeling a small flicker of relief. She'd told him once, offhandedly, about how hard it was to keep up with repairs around the house. A few weeks later, he was showing up with tools and a kind smile. She couldn't remember the last time someone had offered to help her out of the goodness of their heart. To her, Jerome seemed like an answer to prayers she'd never voiced. But there was more to her feelings than just gratitude. There was a loneliness she didn't admit to herself, a need for companionship. The girls didn't have a father figure, and while Keisha did everything she could for them, she often worried about what they might be missing. Jerome filled that gap effortlessly. He'd brought a stability she hadn't felt in a long time. Still, something held her back, a small, quiet voice that reminded her not to put too much trust in anyone. She'd been hurt before, but for now, Keisha silenced that voice. She had enough burdens to carry. Maybe it was okay to let someone share them. The next day, Jerome arrived just after noon, armed with a toolkit and a bright smile. The girls had already warmed to him in a way that made Keisha's heart swell. As he fixed the faucet, he joked with Kyla about her math homework, asked Imani about her artwork, and complimented Nia on her collection of paper flowers she'd made from colored scraps. Watching him with them, Keisha felt a sense of ease that she couldn't remember feeling before. It was like they were a real family, complete with the warmth and laughter she'd always wanted for her daughters. As the weeks went on, Jerome became a regular part of their lives, showing up with small gifts for the girls, or surprising Keisha with a takeout dinner. He offered to pick them up from school when she worked late, and soon, he was even helping Kyla with her homework. It was as if he knew exactly what each of them needed, filling in the cracks Keisha couldn't reach. Yet there were moments, small, fleeting, that gave Keisha pause. Once, she'd walked in to find Jerome sitting close to Imani, showing her something on his phone. The way Imani seemed tense, her shoulders hunched, had struck her as odd, but when she asked later, Imani only shrugged it off. Keisha dismissed it, chalking it up to her own overprotectiveness. But as time went on, these little moments built up, lingering in her mind like whispers in a dark room. She wanted to believe in Jerome, in the idea of a good man who had come into their lives by fate. She wanted so desperately for it to be true. One evening, as she tidied up the kitchen after dinner, Imani lingered in the doorway, her expression distant. "Mom, can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keisha turned, sensing the unusual tone in her daughter's voice. "Of course, baby. What's on your mind?" Imani hesitated, biting her lip. It's about Jerome. He makes me feel kind of weird." A chill ran through Keisha, but she pushed it aside, forcing a gentle smile. "Weird how, honey?" Imani shifted uncomfortably, eyes fixed on the floor. He's around a lot, you know, and sometimes he looks at me funny, like he's thinking something. I can't explain it." Keisha's heart raced, but she swallowed her fear. She told herself Imani was just adjusting to having a man around. It was new and maybe a little uncomfortable. After all, Jerome had been nothing but supportive. "I think he's just trying to be nice, honey," Keisha replied, her voice soothing. "He cares about us, about all of you. Maybe give him a chance?" Imani looked up, her eyes clouded with doubt, but she nodded, giving her mother a small smile. "Okay, Mom." The days passed, and the little warnings faded into the background, overtaken by the daily routine. Keisha grew closer to Jerome, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found their family. But shadows lay beneath the surface, unseen and lurking, waiting for the moment to unravel the fragile world Keisha had worked so hard to build. The routine they built around Jerome became almost second nature. He'd become a fixture in the Johnson household, always around, always willing to lend a hand. Keisha had settled into the comfort he provided, her mind dismissing the occasional strange looks from her daughters or the tension she sensed in Imani. She told herself this was what a family was meant to feel like, a life she hadn't believed she could have. But as days passed, Keisha started noticing the silence, moments where her daughters seemed withdrawn, even evasive. Imani, once her cheerful and open eldest, had grown quieter. She spent more time alone, her art becoming darker, with sketches of storm clouds and broken windows that Keisha didn't understand. Kyla, her middle child, was suddenly getting sick on random mornings, the dark circles under her eyes deepening with each passing day. And then there was Nia, who had become skittish, barely speaking a word when Jerome was around. Keisha told herself they were just adjusting, that every family went through an awkward transition. But a creeping doubt began gnawing at her, one she couldn't quite shake. One evening, Keisha came home earlier than expected from a rare day off, the house unusually quiet. She stepped into the dim living room, her ears straining for any sign of her daughters. As she made her way down the hall, she heard a door close quickly, followed by hurried footsteps. She found Jerome stepping out of Imani's room, his face a mask of surprise. He forced a smile, hands stuffed awkwardly into his pockets. "Oh, hey Keisha, I was just, talking to Imani about her drawings." Keisha nodded, watching as he moved past her down the hallway, her heart racing. Something about the scene seemed wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She knocked softly on Imani's door and entered to find her daughter sitting rigidly on her bed, staring blankly at her sketchbook. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, forcing her voice to sound calm. Imani glanced up, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with red. "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine." But Keisha could see something was off. The glint in her daughter's eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow gaze that chilled her to the bone. Keisha sat beside her, gently placing a hand on Imani's shoulder, her voice soft. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Imani's lip trembled, but she held back whatever words seemed to be on the edge of her tongue. "I'm okay, Mom," she whispered. But as Keisha hugged her, she felt her daughter's shoulders tense, as if bracing against an invisible weight. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of increasing dread. Keisha began noticing small, almost imperceptible changes in her daughters. Imani had taken to locking her bedroom door. Kyla seemed to recoil at Jerome's touch, and Nia refused to leave her room on weekends when he visited. Finally, Keisha's breaking point came late one night when she heard muffled sobs coming from Nia's room. She pushed open the door to find her youngest curled up in her bed, clutching a worn-out copy of Charlotte's Web, as if it were her lifeline. "What's wrong, baby?" Keisha asked, rushing to her side. Nia's small frame shook with silent cries as she looked up at her mother, her voice barely audible. "It's Jerome, Mama. I don't like it when he touches me." The words hit Keisha like a punch to the gut. Her vision blurred, her body going numb. She clutched her daughter tightly, her mind reeling with the horror of what Nia had just revealed. But in her heart, she already knew that this nightmare had been unfolding right under her nose. In the early hours of the morning, Keisha gathered her daughters in the living room, their faces pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. She realized, with growing dread, that they had each been carrying this burden in silence, afraid to speak, to trust, even in their own home. Keisha felt rage simmering beneath her grief as she pieced together the fragments of their stories. Jerome had preyed on her daughters, weaving himself into their lives under the guise of kindness, only to shatter their trust and innocence. Imani, Kyla, and Nia each recounted their own encounters with him, moments that had haunted them in silence. As the morning sun cast its first light through the window, Keisha felt her own strength rising, the fierce protectiveness of a mother determined to make things right. She picked up her phone, her voice shaking as she dialed the police. The legal battle that ensued was a brutal journey, one that tested Keisha's resolve and her family's courage. Jerome's defense was calculated, twisted, and cruel, attempting to paint her daughter's trauma as exaggeration, even suggesting that Keisha herself was unfit as a mother. In the courtroom, Imani, Kyla, and Nia bravely recounted their stories, facing Jerome's cold gaze with a strength that belied their young age. Keisha sat beside them, her hand clutching theirs, her heart breaking for the pain they'd endured and the courage they displayed. When the verdict was finally handed down, Jerome was found guilty on multiple counts of assault and abuse, his sentence condemning him to years in prison. But the damage he'd inflicted lingered, the scars invisible yet painfully real. The days that followed Jerome's sentencing were quiet, almost surreal. The relief was tempered by the long road ahead, as each of them began the slow, painful journey of healing. Keisha enrolled the girls in therapy, surrounding them with support and love, even as they each grappled with their own pain. In time, there were glimmers of hope. Imani returned to her art, her sketches reflecting a newfound strength, a defiance that hadn't been there before. Kyla began finding solace in her studies again, her focus returning with each passing day. And Nia, though still wary, started picking up her books again, reclaiming the parts of her innocence she'd lost. Keisha's own journey was one of quiet resilience. She knew she couldn't undo the past, but she would be there for her daughters, every step of the way, rebuilding the shattered pieces of their lives with love and fierce determination. One morning, as they tended to a small garden they'd planted in their yard, Keisha looked at her daughters and felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they would grow, finding beauty amid the pain. And though the scars would never truly fade, they would face the future together, stronger than before.